Hello everyone and welcome to the webinar today. My name is Nung and I will be your facilitator for today's session. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items to note. Do feel free to adjust the size of the presentation box on your console by expanding the corner of the box. And if at any time throughout the presentation you are experiencing connection issues, please try refreshing the console by pressing the F5 button if you are a PC user, or Command R for Mac users. And if the problem persists, please try closing the event window and then relaunching the event again. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A box, and we will have a live Q&A session at the end. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with you afterwards. Without further ado, I would like to hand the time over to Tanuj, the founder and CEO of 18th Digitech. Over to you, Tanuj. Thank you.
Thank you, Nung. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the episode 4 of this webinar series. Today's episode focuses on the hidden cost of online fraud and false declines on merchants across Australia and the world. As the online retail spending increases, the amount of card not present fraud, which is typical for online businesses, has increased by 3.8% to $418 million in 2020. This is not only affecting merchant revenue, but is also affecting their bottom line. My first guest today is Mathew Alexander, e-commerce manager for Thendro, a customer of 18 Digitech. Mathew has been managing e-commerce for Thendro for 5+ years and has been constantly faced with payment and fraud-related challenges, considering the high-risk nature of the industry Thendro operates in. Mathew has done a lot of research in payment gateways and fraud protection and has kindly agreed to share his experience with us today. My second guest is Kooi, country manager for ClearSale. ClearSale is a full service-based cloud platform that automates fraud prevention paired with human intervention, helping businesses to reduce risks as they increase their sales. ClearSale is the only company that never automatically declines an order before a manual review process, allowing it to achieve industry-high approval rates while eliminating false declines, thus bringing additional revenue for their merchants. Welcome, Mathew and Ralph. Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
So before we start discussing the risks online fraud presents to merchants, I would like to invite Ralph to share a short presentation on online fraud and risks to merchants. Over to you, Ralph.
Thanks, Tanuj. I'll just quickly start just by showing a little bit about ClearSale, where we've come from and where we're now at. As you can see, we've been operating for over 20 years. We originally started in Brazil, which is sort of seen as the epicenter of fraud and where it all it's still a wild west in terms of fraud prevention, and we've been actually been market leader there for over 20 years. It's where our founder was founded the business, and we have seen the reasons why we've had such a manual review process in place. I'll go into detail a little bit more in that in a second, but it just showcases the nature of Brazil being so fraudulent that the order approval rates were so significantly low, that we needed a manual review before we actually could approve orders. This has really became our founding cornerstone in the business, and we've been sort of building out that platform ever since. Just to sort of show some different companies we worked with globally, these are enterprise businesses, but our platform is scaled for small business who do maybe 10 orders a month to businesses who do over 100,000 orders and plus. So where does ClearSale operate in? As you would expect, any company, any industry, vertical in the e-commerce industry, we have customers based in those industries. However, just to sort of dive into this topic here of high risk is where we really excel. We see that in items like jewelry items, drug and pharmaceuticals, those are really being targeted usually for high fraud. Thus, the actual resale value of those products are quite easy to do over the dark web or even on Gumtree and companies like that globally. So what does ClearSale now really do, and what's the difference? So it works in 3 different milestones. One, we prevent or try to prevent the fraudulent activity occurring. So we have a fraud prevention on the website, look at behavior of the user, how they interact, how they came to your website, and all those things to make sure it's normal human behavior. One of the things would be if you actually go to a website, you look at one product and you compare to another product, which is very similar. If somebody doesn't do that and just goes straight to one high order, straight to checkout, immediately checks out, that could be seen as a red flag based on different data that we collect. Now, normally vendors would say any high-risk order would be automatically declined. We take a different point of view. We look at a high-risk order. We say, well, that doesn't seem right. We have a manual review team in Brazil, currently over 1,300 staff that go through manually and reviews that order. So they'll check different data points in the back end. They'll look at how does that come through, how they came to us, and do some analysis. On the back of that, if we do make a mistake and we actually approve an order that turns out to be a chargeback, we would fully reimburse you for that chargeback. So we made sure there's no risk for the merchant to actually approve more orders and continue to work with us, because you'll be fully covered. But just to show you in detail how that would work. So an online order comes in, we do a quick analysis, and decide here if it's a high risk or not. If it's a high risk order, it goes to the analysis team. If it doesn't, it goes straight to checkout as a normal process. However, if it's high risk, we look at different data in the backend, and we then determine if it's fraud, if it's a normal order and sort of approved, or it needs further analysis. In some cases, customers ask us, can you please do a manual review by calling the customer and ask for verification. This is entirely up to the customer to do so, and if we want to, they allow us to call the customer. In some cases, we have enough data in the background to sort of really identify where it's from. So it could be a case of fat fingers on an iPhone, that you misuse one of the CVC numbers, for instance, or different data points in the back end that tells us, well, this is really the right person. We've seen it in the past in COVID times where a lot of new merchants and new customers came on board on the actual internet and buying for the first time, or even buying for their parents overseas, which caused a lot of issues for normal rules-based solutions. With us, that wasn't much an issue because we had a manual review in place. So we could see that the data of the user collecting it, send it to the other person across the world was still all right. There we go. So where do you operate in a fraud space at the moment? Which technologies and platforms? As you can see, we have a wide range of technologies available, and the platform that we integrate with. If you have a custom solution, we also have an API integration as well. So because we've been doing this for such a long time, all the integrations have been pre-built and easy to follow. Now, just to sort of showcase what it does for a big user. Just to show what happened for a customer of ours of ASUS. They had major issues with decline rates, meaning a lot of the orders that came through were being declined as they were deemed too risky. And even the chargeback rates were about 4% in some cases, which is really high for a big manufacturer like ASUS, who's shipping millions of orders a month. So what would we do? We made sure that we are able to identify the false declines and make sure they turn into actual orders. So the actual false declines dropped significantly. And secondly, the chargebacks also continued to drop. It went from sometimes 4% or 1.1% to even lower to 0.2%, meaning we really made sure the fraud prevention helped prevent fraud initially. We made sure that the orders that were flagged as high risk turned into actual profitable orders, and the risk for the merchant became significantly less. So we were actually reimbursing the customer for it, but also we were able to reduce that number significantly anyway. And more a homegrown solution, an example. This is a company in South Australia. They already had a good process in place internally to identify fraud, but they still need to make sure that they had no fraud happening initially. So they were paying for a solution initially that covered them for fraud, which became quite expensive for them to maintain. So with us, they said, "Oh, look, we rather want you to do the fraud prevention side." And not necessarily look at the chargeback side, but we're pretty confident we can maintain that initially. But still, in that case, we've seen an increase in volume based on our ability to identify false deadlines. So our ability to identify high-risk orders, manually review them, and still making sure they goes into the checkout. We'll go into a little more detail with Matt along that and later on, and show and sort of tell him what it means for his business. But just in short on where we sit. We've been doing this for 20 years, so we're actually one of the oldest companies in the world doing fraud prevention. Dedicated team for our solutions. We have a different way of looking at things in terms of fraud prevention, the manual review, but also understand that's not one size fits all. So we are a very bespoke solution and very easy to integrate with your e-commerce platform. Secondly, very flexible. We've been in a local store around the corner to the big enterprise town, all working with us on the same platform and easy to scale. Up to you. Tanuj?
No, thank you, Ralph. That's very interesting. And I really find the idea that there's a human sitting at the back, to have a final say. And I'm going to come back to you on that. But what I would like to do is maybe start with Matt for now. And Matt, can you tell us a bit about Thendro and what have been the biggest hurdles in terms of growth that you have faced in the past?
Certainly. Thank you, Tanuj. So Thendro have been around for about 40 years. They've got many different facets of the business, including tattooing, the industry leaders in body piercing, fashion retail, B2B commerce, and also we have a few different websites operating in the adult industry or as part of the business. Some of those websites, which are classified as high risk from banks that we own and operate, have come under the eye of banks in the last few years. Unfortunately, when they introduced new laws and made things a lot more strict on who can trade, what they can trade, and unfortunately sometimes just due to affiliation and representations of brands. So a few years ago, we had some of our payment gateways turned off overnight due to these new laws that came in that were basically based around what the banks and Visa and MasterCard are deciding what you can and can't buy with your own money. Unfortunately, that caused a big issue for us in the business. I had to pivot with the other staff members and team members of Thendro. We had to pivot very quickly on how we can keep the orders coming in. Because basically, once you have something turned off overnight and you've got hundreds of orders coming in a day, you've got to keep those customers happy. And as we all know, working in the e-commerce world, if you don't have a streamlined, easy payment gateway, your customers are more than likely to leave, which will increase your bounce rate within the website, which is nothing. No one wants that as a business moving forward, because basically we want to make sure that you can streamline the customers to make payments and everyone's happy at the end of the day to get repeat business. Unfortunately, with that, we did have to move to different payment gateways and merchant facilities. We did this very quickly. We did manage to mitigate this risk and go around all that stuff. But unfortunately, what happens when you start moving to some of the smaller merchant facilities, their technology is not as advanced as some of the larger businesses. And unfortunately, this saw a huge increase in fraud, chargebacks, positive fraud chargebacks and things like that. And it basically in turn just ended up costing us more money because we had to manually manage this process over the year. And basically more manpower, more money, more time, and just a basic cost to the business that is not necessary that anyone, working in an industry should have to experience or deal with. So that's
interesting. And I understand that you recently moved, obviously to Adobe Commerce Cloud from Shopify. So
yes.
Take us through the thought process behind the move, and how has your experience been with Adobe Commerce Cloud and 18 Digitech so far?
Yes, certainly, Tanuj. So we used to run on Shopify a few years ago, and basically we decided to move across to Magento for a few different reasons, and we found a wonderful company, 18 Digitech, to be part of our business and join us, which was a wonderful experience for everyone. But basically, we moved from Shopify to Magento because basically with Shopify, whether you like it or not, they sort of own and operate your business. They control your data and how you can actually deal with all that. When you work in the adult industry, you have to do things a little bit differently. So being able to own, operate, and do what we want with our own data was a big pivoting point for us and how we manage all that information. So moving to Magento was one of those options that allowed us to do that. But it basically also allowed us to basically expand our business. Unfortunately, one of the downsides of Shopify is they are very limited on the payment gateways that they offer to their clients. So what that means, if you work in a certain industry, part of the adult industry or something of the likes, you might not get approved by their payment gateways that are actually provided by Shopify. So we basically moved to Magento as well for part of this because we had partnerships with other merchant facilities, and they were able to integrate a lot easier into Magento to allow us to take payments and streamline that as best as we could. So it was a big learning curve, but it allowed for a lot more growth within the business, allowed us to implement more stuff. And we formed a wonderful relationship with Digitech and Tanuj, who have been a big help in moving forward with all this. So it was very important for us to manage, operate, and own our own data and how we want to deal with that so we could expand our business and increase growth.
Look, it has been a pleasure for myself personally and my team to work with you and the wider team. And Thendro, it has been a wonderful experience for us as well to have you guys as a customer. And also, your Adobe Commerce Cloud has also allowed you to run all your brands, including your B2B and B2C brands, from one platform. How has this allowed you to streamline your processes and introduce efficiencies in the way you run your business?
Yes, good question, actually. So we have a lot of different brands running under Thendro. As I was mentioning before, we've got tattooing, we're industry leaders in body piercing, we've got a whole bunch of internal brands. But one of the other big aspects of the business is our B2B. So having everything under the one platform has allowed us to streamline, reduce the workload, because obviously you have to try and make sure you're implementing all your products online, keeping everything updated. And if you've got multiple platforms and areas like that, it can be very time consuming. So moving across to get all of our major hitters onto the one platform has allowed us to get better reporting, integration, and one of the biggest aspects was getting integration into our back-end systems. So for a business like NetSuite, so we can integrate and just push data live and keep everything updated as best as possible has been one of the biggest goals at the end of the day, which was moving from Magento to this as well.
Oh, good. So, this brings me to the challenges. You talked about, the problems you have had with the banks and the fraud. So, obviously, fraud has been an issue that we have been helping you with. How are you protecting yourself previously against fraud, and what were the major challenges you faced in that area?
That's a very good question. When it happened, it was a bit of a shock, actually, because it's something that I'd never experienced in the industry. Having a payment gateway removed, it actually threw me off a fair bit and had to start thinking very quickly outside of the box on how we can deal with this. But basically, a few years ago, the big banks decided to, as what they call debank, almost anyone working within the adult industry overnight. This caused a huge issue for a lot of people, smaller businesses especially. But it was a huge challenge in working out how to take online payments that most of Australia are probably running through the big four banks anyway. So with that, unfortunately, it did come with a huge increase of fraud and chargebacks, as I discussed earlier. But we had to get a few systems in place from our merchant providers and internally to help deal with, just the fraud, the chargeback, and making sure that we're just not getting ripped off, basically. So getting all these processes in place to mitigate the risk was a very large task. It was something that multiple staff had to pivot on. We had to have multiple meetings on how to deal with this. And running a few different merchant facilities at the time also increased the amount of workload that accounts and other aspects of the business had to deal with as well. So it's starting to increase more and more. I mean, as we all know, we're all here. The online world is starting to take off and it's starting to grow at a rapid rate, which I'm hoping most everyone here in this chat will be experiencing because it's a wonderful thing. But part of the other issue as well is just mitigating that risk. Unfortunately, with an increase in business, increase in sales, and everything like that, and a bigger presence on the online for your business, fraudsters will start to come along and tackle that a bit more. So having something prepared and ready in place to make sure you've got processes to deal with your risk, your chargeback, and your fraud prevention within the business is something that I think a few businesses in the next 6 to 12 months are going to have to start addressing a lot better, and just making sure that that the money that is coming through is legit and you are actually receiving it. Because one of the worst things is sending a product out and then you find 2 weeks later the person who actually purchased it on their own credit card is a fraudster and have claimed a chargeback. And unfortunately, banks and all those people, they play in favor of the client and the person actually purchasing the goods. So chasing all that information and passing it back is part of the process, and making sure that you are getting, the money that you receive for the product you have dispatched. So part of the fun with that as well, we've been dealing with this for a long time, and we recently met with Ralph and ClearSale. They have been a wonderful asset to the business. Basically, they mitigate and look after all this risk with insurance, which is a huge thing that most businesses should probably start looking into, in my opinion, to make sure that you are receiving your payments for the goods that you are dispatching out to your customers.
Look, I totally agree with you. Like we have seen across our merchants as well that chargeback and fraud has been a major issue, affecting their bottom line. And obviously, you don't even just lose your, the payment, you also use the merchandise that you had many times sent to the customer. So, and and on top of that, you get a chargeback fees sometimes from some banks, which is like a kick in the guts, right? So,
Very much so.
I think this is an opportune moment for me to bring you into this conversation here. Payment gateways and platforms tend to be very risk-averse, which means merchants need to be careful in what orders they approve. Is this a valid concern that merchants are raising?
Not really. It's yes and no. In this instance with Matt, where he's been in a business that's been operating for a very long time, he's obeying the same rules as any other business online, and sometimes even more strict. The person buying it can still be one same transaction or one shopping exercise, buy his stuff from Kohl's and then buys some of his website. So it's more for the merchant, for the actual gateways and the banking. It's more a reputational risk that they're trying to mitigate and reduce as much as possible. It does not say anything about the business itself that, in this case, Matt's operating in. So compare that to Australia being a pretty safe country to operate in from an e-commerce point of view, where fraud is about 2%. We see that they're being very risk averse, and sometimes will be proven orders up to 5% of orders that are coming through. So there's a gap of risk assessment straight away, and that's where we sort of play in that space quite heavily. But on the flip side, I guess what you're dealing with fraudsters, usually they're working teams, they're humans. This is their job. This is their actual job on making sure they make money for their company, and it's a $1 billion industry. So they will do anything they can to make sure they can avoid the rules that are being set in place, and they'll test those rules out systematically with teams and trying to break through your security, so to speak. And this is, I think, why a lot of the merchants need to be careful at that fraud. It will happen at some stage, even if they maybe had never happened before. It will happen at some stage, and I think that's why the gateways and the platforms are extra cautious and risk averse, which is in this case, and in many cases really, giving the merchants less money online, which is really sad. But that's something we can avoid and you can work with. But it's just for businesses like Matt in that risky space, it's like a double-edged sword.
So what, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is that it's not just the fraud that is the concern for Australian merchants, it's also the false declines. Like, those real transactions or your real customers that are being declined due to false or incorrect regulations or incorrect formulas you may have put in. So,
they're being flagged for the wrong reasons or anything risky.
As I said earlier, and I think you have covered it in your presentation and your previous response as well. But what I find it interesting is that while most of your competitors have gone down the path of fully automating the fraud prevention and order approval process, ClearSale has followed an alternate path with a human at the end of the transaction to reduce false declines. So can you please talk us through the thought process behind implementing this and the advantages it offers to your merchants?
Yeah. So when we started in Brazil, there was a direct need for this. Like there was no other way a business in Brazil and Latin America could scale the way that could scale by some human contact and reviews. But what it gave us is that we could continue to get more data. So the data that we could collected was not just on bad data, but also on false decline data, on the actual data that initially looked bad, but turned out to be real orders and real customers. So it created for us a feedback loop that went back into our manual machine learning and our AI at the front end. So we continue to build up that cycle of feedback of orders coming through, identifying for orders, and in our case, we look for orders in ways to approve, rather look for fraud that we can decline, and which is a big difference if you look at algorithms that then really tweet and get more going down one route where you need to make sure you can be as open as possible and find ways to approve orders, and that's really the way that we've seen such a big issue with us, that we can have this manual review process, a team of 1,300 staff going through those orders, giving the feedback to the customer, but also back to our machine learning, and then we run different algorithms to continue to increase our order approval rate, which is in this instance would give the merchant more revenue coming through the door.
Okay, correct. Like, obviously, as we said, that you are reducing the false declines. Lot more than most of your competitors are.
Yeah.
So perfect. So look, and Ralph, fraud and chargebacks tend to be seen as part of e-commerce, right? And seen as a variable cost in the business. How do you view these frauds and chargebacks, and do businesses really have to live with them?
No, they don't. The beauty of a fraud prevention tool like ours is that it's based on the number of orders. So our pricing model for smaller merchants is based on the percentage. So the more you grow, even if you do 1 order or 10 orders, it's really just a really small portion of how we would help you. Unfortunately, the smaller businesses that hurt a lot faster because they have work with less orders that come through the door, so their margins are not as heavy and have not much more of a buffer than the larger businesses. So to give an example of what it means for a different company for when a chargeback happens, we had a company on the Gold Coast who started selling sunglasses, and they had issues with few retail stores, and then they went into selling online, and within the first 20 orders, 6 of them were chargebacks at $200 a pop on Shopify. So they lost the merchants, lost the 6 times $25 for Shopify that penalized them on that. And that's no way for them to run a business. Like their margins aren't that high to cover that. So you need to do a lot more good sales to make up for the losses. And for a larger business, the implications of chargebacks are obviously, the larger they grow, they want to make sure they can cover that. So they'll put in more processes, like Matt has done, put in more processes in place until at some stage that process was actually more expensive to maintain than actually buying a solution like ours in to cover for that, plus then all the additional benefits from our solution as well. And that's the main thing that merchants need to sort of look for. Like, where am I best at? What am I doing the best at myself? And you can't be anything that you want to do. Like, you can't wear that many hats in the business. So you need to do what you're good at, and outsource the rest instead. You do the same with e-commerce, with online advertising and a bunch of other stuff. This is just one of those tools in your belt.
Yeah. Now, look, in fact, I just remember, long time ago, I think it would be at least 10 or 12 years ago, we used to deal with, at that time, with a lot of smaller merchants getting into the e-commerce space. And one of those merchants was selling, white goods and electronics online, and they had a massive order for TVs and white goods, and which they fulfilled. And then it was charged back. They literally lost $25,000 to $30,000 on those orders, and they broke their back, and they just went belly up after that, because you make next to nothing in terms of margin on TVs, on those white goods. So if you get a chargeback on such a massive chargeback, you are more than affected by that.
And in some cases, other platforms may say, look, this is now a red mark on your business. We need to find a different platform, or the gateway would say you need to find a different gateway, without even being in a high-risk environment or industry that Matt's in. But it still have those calls with customers as well. We've been in households but have been stung by a big chargeback and had to move platform and jump through all sorts of hoops.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So my next question is probably concerns both of you. So I'll start with Matt, and maybe Ralph, you can jump in after that. So some businesses are experiencing not experiencing a lot of fraudulent orders at this stage or chargebacks, but are concerned that fraud will happen in the future at some stage, as you guys mentioned as well. What options do they have? What are your top tips to these merchants to minimize their risk?
Yes, certainly. One of the biggest things that you can do, even as a small business, you might not even be noticing the chargebacks within your business. It's unfortunately an aspect of e-commerce that no one should really experience, because it's basically crooks trying to take money. And as Rolf and Tanuj were saying, once you send out the product and there's a chargeback done, you've lost the money on the product and you've lost the product. So you've actually lost double your revenue here, which is very unfortunate, plus the time and effort that your staff with the overheads have put in to actually try and recoup this, which has come at a loss. So some of the biggest tips that I would recommend is get friendly with your merchant provider, and basically just jump on board, and there should be options within your merchant provider to actually check on your chargebacks that are actually happening. So it's very important to make sure that you're keeping an eye on this. As Rolf has already touched on, you want to make sure that you're keeping your levels a lot lower, because if you're not paying attention to them, your chargebacks, which is kind of like a credit card rating in a way, will start to increase. And the higher it gets, you'll start receiving more and more phone calls from the banks or your merchant provider on, hey, I need you to reduce this, or we're going to have to cut your facilities, unfortunately. So some of the biggest tips I'd recommend is get friendly with your merchant provider or bank that actually takes your payments. Make sure you're getting daily reports on your chargebacks and actually monitoring this. The next step, if you're doing that, is depending on the size of your business, if you can accommodate jumping on board with a business like ClearSale, where they will just automate everything for you, offer insurance, and it allows you to basically clear a lot of overheads that you're already accommodating to deal with this. So, and then on top of that, just a little bit of manual process within the business. Unfortunately, sometimes you might need to actually manually go and chase the invoice, the delivery dockets from the deliveries, and also just checking what goods were sent and how they were sent. And once you send all that information off, you've got multiple facets to deal with: the banks, the postage, the customer. So it takes up a lot of time, and onboarding a company like ClearSale has been one of the biggest things that we've done in a while, and it's actually saved us a lot of time and overheads, because those three aspects, which include multiple different staff members, are now running through one external business, and that is their expertise. They look after this, they know this, they've got technology that's been there for over 20 years that, as a business, medium-sized business at Thendro, it's something that we can't accommodate, and it's something that we can't afford. And most businesses can't afford those forms of technology to onboard. So building that relationship across those lines and those three different areas is very, very important to make sure that your business is, A, getting the money that your customer has sent to you, making sure that you're not losing the money the customer has sent you, the products, and then making sure that you have processes in place, and then looking at a business like ClearSale to help onboard and mitigate your risk as a business.
Yeah. Perfect. Good. And what are your thoughts, Ralph?
Yeah, it's hard to follow on that one. But I would
I
say
think he's covered almost everything, but
yeah, he's done well. I would say look at the right numbers. Like everybody is in e-commerce, it's all about attracting business and attracting new customers, but which is a whole different game itself. But there's a lot of revenue in the actual retention of the customer. So make sure you get the customers there. And once a customer gets a negative experience, even on the checkout, they will just go somewhere else. Unless you offer a really unique product, they can go at this stage. They can go to so many websites and buy the same product at a different price, or maybe just at the same without any issues being rejected. So keep in mind things like order approval rate, and it's and I keep saying this a lot, but in Matt's case, the change of just that alone was an increase in nearly 4% within a week. So for him, the business itself paid for our solution straight away on that week nearly alone. So imagine the actual repercussion of that moving forward, and the team business that he'll receive from that, the customer life cycle he can now process and really get familiar with the customer moving forward. And there are many tools out there that help with even the after sales of that as well. So everybody is looking for getting the new business in, but it's a lot of it makes sense looking at what you have now, building out the structure you have to keep the customers there for long term, so that you don't have to compete anymore. You just have a good product and a good niche that you operate in, and a good service that you provide, which means the customer don't have the need to go somewhere else.
All right. Look, gentlemen, I can talk to you guys about fraud prevention and false declines for hours, but I think we are running out of time. Before we finish, Matt, I would like you to share a few of your tips about the holiday season, which is fast approaching. And how do you see this holiday season being different to previous few years, considering COVID and the lack of merchandise available?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So with the holiday seasons quickly approaching, there's been a lot of reports going around, and you can do a little bit of your own digging as well, but there's going to be a large influx of people wanting to go shopping at bricks and mortar stores again. It's just part of the unfortunate lockdowns that have come about in Australia and the so-called freedom days that they're talking about in the very, very near future. So trying to keep your customers coming back to your websites, if you are solely just an e-commerce website with no bricks and mortar, you need to make sure that you're engaging your customers as often as you possibly can without annoying them too much. So keeping them updated on online sales, promotions, even just, shipping stuff that's going on. As we're all aware, Ozpost and other things are experiencing huge delays at the moment due to the influx. So keeping your customers updated on what's going on with your business, the products that you're receiving, just anything that you're doing is the best way to keep them engaged, to come back and check out your website when needed. Now, most of the general public will be going out to bricks and mortar stores to keep shopping. It's just something that's going to be inevitable, but you have to just make sure you're pivoting and keeping on top of your relationship with your customers, sending out emails, EDMs, the socials, SMS if you have that within your business, or the capabilities to send SMSs to your customers. They're all very important things, because all it does is just basically jogs their memory to say, hey, we're still here, we're still online, we're still operating. So that's going to be a very, very important side of the things. So one of the other aspects of this, which I'm sure a lot of retailers are going to start experiencing soon, but as a business, trying to keep stock, let alone in bricks and mortar and online for sale, has been a challenging issue for many businesses, small, medium, and large, just due to logistical issues that have happened over the coming years with basically COVID. So due to all the logistical issues, the flagging, the quarantines, everything like that, stock is taking a lot longer to get places, and some businesses are actually not even receiving their stock at the moment at all, which is detrimental to a business. So one of the biggest things that I can recommend to everyone, and this is something that our businesses Thendro like to try and do with all our external business partners, including Ralph and Tanuj, is basically keeping a very good relationship with these people. It's no longer about keeping a business relationship. So if your externals that you work with you in your business are helping bring money in, helping bring stock in, helping prevent fraud, which at the end of the day allows you to have more money in the bank, you need to basically start incorporating them into what we like to call as part of the business. Even though they're externals and you're dealing with them, you're paying with them, it's very, very important to make sure that you're actually building that relationship on these people. So for us at Thendro, we've got very, very good relationships with our suppliers, and we can thank our supply chain and our logistics teams for that, because they have ongoing conversations, they catch up, and they also just have general chats with these people. And what that does, it helps build the next level of a relationship with these business partners who are basically sending you your stock that you need to sell. So when that happens, and in unfortunate times like COVID and the pandemic, having that relationship is super, super important. Basically because they will try and help prioritize you over other businesses that are basically not offering the same sort of, friendship across those lines. And, some other people have also gone down the track where they've been quite upset and they start yelling at these people. So I've seen it all, unfortunately, in these little areas. And it just goes to show that building a relationship that is the one next level beyond a business or professional relationship is something that a lot of businesses are going to have to start pivoting on, just to make sure that their business is being looked after and they are going to get the right stock and as much stock as they possibly can. Because at the end of the day, our customers and the stock are the main sole reason that we're all here.
These were some very good insights, Matt. Thank you for that. And I noticed that you mentioned SMS, right? So I think I should take this opportunity to invite our audience to join us in the next episode of this series on 9th of November. Which focuses on the importance of a holistic online channel marketing strategy for holiday success. In this episode, we are going to discuss why companies should start thinking about incorporating SMS into their omni-channel marketing and the opportunities it brings to brands of all shapes and sizes. And my guests are Naveen Jain from Tavio and Sophia Newcomb from Starshipit. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and a special thanks to Matt and Ralph for taking the time out of your busy schedule and sharing your experiences with us. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.